All right, so like I said earlier, we do have that work day coming up on Saturday. If you can come, let me know and kind of what time you're going to be there. There's going to be a lot of work for us to get done, Swag. And we'd be really happy to have you to come help us out. We're continuing on in our study on the book of Hebrews. We are in chapter 8. This is a little bit, I would think it's probably going to be a shorter lesson. It's straightforward, in my opinion, as opposed to last week, which was kind of an adventure to me. I thought that learning about Melchizedek was like super interesting, but whatever, to each his own, I guess. But the title of our topic tonight is just covenant. All right, covenant is what we're going to be talking about. And essentially what we're going to see here in chapter 8 is that it brings us to the point of basically the first few chapters of this entire thing. And what we've been trying to get, I guess, the topic of discussion, what they've been trying to really get into your head, as in the writer, for the first few chapters of Hebrews, and this overarching book in and of itself, obviously, is the supremacy of Christ, but that we have a perfect high priest. All right, we have a perfect high priest. And scripturally, we learn that he sat down at the right hand of God, and that is where he remains. He resides there today. And that is significant for us because it shows that he has fully made a way for us all the way to the throne of God, right? That he didn't take it halfway. He didn't get tired and give up. He didn't not do it because he didn't feel like it. He made a way all the way for us to the throne of God, and that he truly is the Son of God. All right, because this seat at the right hand of the Father is reserved for one person and one person only, and that is his Son. So him being positioned there is significant for us in a twofold way, because it shows us, yes, Christ's work on the cross was finished. He fully rose from the dead, and he ascended back up to be with his Father. He is now seated next to him. So he fully made a way for us, and he is 100% exactly who he says he is. Right? He truly is the Son of God, part of the Trinity, right? And his sacrifice was forever. He does not have to die again. This sacrifice that he made was once and for all, and it has covered your sins forever, for everyone, from before to after and into infinity. One thing we've learned as we've gone through the book of Hebrews is when we dig into high priest, we've learned that they offer gifts, right? They go in to offer up a sacrifice to basically bring about peace, to bring about reconciliation for their community to God, so that they then have peace with him again, which means that, like we've covered in the first 7 chapters we've been through, that our high priest also had something to offer. Right? But what is different about our high priest is he did not show up with the blood of an animal or a lot of meat or different things like jewelry and gold and different things of that nature to please God. He showed up with himself. Right? He laid himself down as the sacrifice. And I just want us to stop right there real quick. All right. Before we even get into reading the text, before we even get into any of that stuff, you need to understand this from the get-go. Okay. It is insane that he would do that. It's absolutely insane. It's something that we've kind of hit on a little bit together over the course of the first 7 chapters. But how ridiculous is it that the all-knowing God of the universe, who knows everything that you're ever going to do, ever going to say, all the ways you're ever going to forsake him and fall short, for every single person that has ever walked the face of this planet, he knows you inside out better than you will ever know yourself, and all the ways that you will fail, all the way that humanity will fall short. And he said, I want to send my perfect Son, who has no imperfection in him whatsoever, who will never fall short, never mess up, never fail me because he's part of me. But I want to send him on your behalf so that you can know me. Right? That is stupid. Right? For us as people, I wouldn't do that for someone. Right? I wouldn't even do that it's hard to do that for someone that you care about, let alone someone that doesn't give a crap about you. Right? But God said, I'm going to send my perfect son, the spotless lamb, the perfect sacrifice, to die for people that on a larger scale are never even going to care about me. Right? The people that spat on him as he was on the cross, he was there for them. It doesn't matter if you accept him or not. He still died on the cross for you. Your lack of belief does not nullify what he did. All right, he still did it, and he still did it joyfully. So, Hebrews chapter 8, before I forget to read it. Now, the main point of what we're saying is this. We do have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, and who serves in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle set up by the Lord, not by a mere human being. Every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices. See what we've been talking about here. And so it was necessary for this one also to have something to offer. If he were on earth, he would not be a priest, for there are already priests who offer the gift prescribed by the law. They serve at a sanctuary that's a copy of the shadow of what is in heaven. This is why Moses was warned when he was about to build the tabernacle. See to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown to you on the mountain. But in fact, the ministry Jesus has received is as superior to theirs as the covenant of which he is the mediator is superior to the old one, since the new covenant is established on better promises. For if there had been nothing wrong with the first covenant, no place would have been sought for another. But God found fault with the people and said, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the old covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt. Because they did not remain faithful to my covenant, and I turned away from them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will establish with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, for I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. By calling this covenant new, he has made the first one obsolete, and what is obsolete and outdated will soon disappear. All right, so now that we've got the chapter in and of itself, you can kind of see where we're coming from in the beginning. But it is ridiculous that God would send his son on our behalf. There's a beautiful picture of this it's kind of prophesying the coming of this king that you can find in the Old Testament in Genesis chapter 2, which should come up here on the screen as I flip and find it myself. Genesis chapter 2. Old Testament, folks. Interesting stuff. And this is the story of Abraham and his son Isaac. Now, when you read this story in and of itself, it's a pretty cool story. But whenever you actually understand the ramifications of what is really going on in this story, it unlocks a whole new chapter and a whole new meaning for this for you. Because what this is, what you're going to come to see as I kind of talk you through it, is that this is a picture of basically Christ to come. Right, is what we're being shown here. So Genesis 22, buckle up. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servant, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we'll come back to you. All right, before we go any further, you have that this is his one and only son that he is going to offer as a sacrifice. But notice something important that Abraham says in this verse. Stay here with the donkey to the servants, right? While I and the boy go over there as an up on the mountain. We will worship, and then we will come back to you, right? He says, we will come back to you. Now, this is a man who has just been instructed by God to sacrifice his one and only son. So, how does he know that they're going to come back? Ever thought about that? Pretty interesting, right? We'll get into that in a second. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, which is very significant. This is Isaac carrying his own cross. In the same way that Jesus ascended up to Golgotha to be hung on a cross for us, Isaac is carrying his wood, his cross, up this hill as well. As the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father, Abraham, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. And this is where Isaac starts to kind of catch on a little bit. "The fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham, here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Don't do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you've not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide," and to this day it said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." All right, so we can go on and read the rest of it, but that's pretty much where we need to kind of pump the brakes on this stuff. A few things to interpret from this. This is an Old Testament way of basically a prophecy of Christ to come, right? You have Isaac who is bearing his cross, carrying it up the hill, and Abraham has been told, "You're going to sacrifice your son." So when Abraham looks at these dudes and says, "We're going to come back down off this mountain," where does he get that from? Right? How does he know that they're going to come back down? Well, he says to his own son, God's going to provide the lamb for this sacrifice. It's easy for us to read at the beginning of the story and say, God's providing you as the lamb for this sacrifice. But what Abraham knew was that God had promised him previously, "I'm giving you a son," right? So one, I promise you I'm giving you this. Now, does that mean he can take it away? Sure. But God also promised Abraham, "I'm going to multiply the generations from you." Literally, your descendants are going to outnumber the stars in the sky. So if we cut Isaac out of the equation, it's a little bit difficult for that to happen. So what Abraham is doing is he is trusting God at his word. He says, "You want me to take my son up to this mountain? Well, I know one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to rescue him or I'm going to kill him and he's going to be with you. And either way, you're good and I trust you." All right, but when we see this ram over to the right in the bush, that is literally like us looking into a portal into the future, because that ram caught in the thicket is Christ for us. Right? It's almost as if Abraham looked and in that moment he saw Jesus in that bush, because that is who the ram was. I've taught you guys this before, but think about the ridiculousness of this, that God made this animal, this ram, for the specific purpose for it to one day walk up this mountain and get stuck in this bush at this exact time to be sacrificed on the behalf of Isaac. It is incredible, but that is a picture to us of the coming of Christ, that there would one day be this perfect sacrifice, this perfect blood offering, this perfect high priest that goes on our behalf. And the crazy thing is that does take place for us in the New Testament, but we are told about it in an underlying way in the first book of the Bible. Right? That's insane. That's absolutely incredible. But the ministry of Jesus is superior, all right, along with his covenant. So not only is his ministry as a high priest superior, but the covenant that follows him is also superior. We look into verse 7 and we see that don't get it twisted. There wasn't anything wrong with God's words in the covenant that he made the first go around. So for us, verse 7, not in Genesis, but back into Acts. Or Hebrews, sorry. I've been reading Acts in the morning in my quiet time. You're still in the wrong chapter. There we go. So, whenever we see this, it's not that God's words and the covenant that God made was wrong on God's part. There was a problem with us and our ability to keep that covenant, to live up to the standard, and to be holy enough to attain the things that he had set out for us. We could not do it because we continually chose sin and the world over him. We then learn that he will put his laws on our minds and write them on our hearts. He will be our God and we will be his people. And that should be an immense encouragement to us as children of God, that because that is spoken is the reality that we get to walk in now, that we have his laws on our minds and he has written them on our hearts. He is our God and we get to be his people by following after him with our hearts. This first covenant came short of perfection. Otherwise, there would have been no room for a second arrangement. However, God long ago spoke of making a new covenant. The problem with the first covenant was that the people did not fulfill their obligations. Under the first covenant, the blessings depended on the people's faithfulness, and instead they were disobedient and unfaithful because their faults could break the covenant. God promised through Jeremiah to establish a new covenant with his people that would avoid this problem altogether. And you can find that on your own in the book of Jeremiah, starting in chapter 31, going all the way through chapter 38. All right, this new covenant will differ from the covenant that God had given to Israel at Mount Sinai. All right, speaking through Jeremiah, God described his attention to little Israel in terms of this, basically a doting father, like a father that is watching over his children, as looking over his wobbly little toddler of a son, essentially holding his arms up and watching every step that he takes. That's the way that God is caring for Israel. Despite his tender love for Israel, his people did not respond faithful or obedient. Because the former covenant where God's future blessings depended on the people's obedience, that covenant could not overcome their faulty and inadequate performance. So God disregarded the people. God tells Jeremiah that his future covenant will surpass the former covenant in at least 3 significant ways, and we need to remember these tonight. First, in verse 10, it teaches us that internal conformity will replace external compulsion. All right? Internal conformity will replace external compulsion. Under the former covenant, God had scribbled his laws on tablets of stone, and under the new covenant, God promises to write his laws on his people's hearts and place them in their minds. God gives his new covenant people a new nature from above. Their fallen nature is still present, so their sinful nature is still present, and believers must continually be putting it to death. And that's something that a lot of believers, for whatever reason, get twisted. They're like, I follow God, my sin is gone. Yes, your sin is dead, but for whatever reason you like to keep dragging it around with you. It teaches us that the devil's going to come after us because he is alive and well. He wants to see you slip up. He wants to see you fall short. He wants to see you screw up, and he is going to prod you, attack you, and come for you every single day. So what God tells us to do is, listen, this sinful nature that you have put to death is still going to nag you until you come home with me. So you need to put it to death every single day. And what that means for us is that we need to learn to choose him over whatever comes our way, because we need to have a concrete, real belief that Jesus truly is better than anything that this world has to offer. Because anytime that we choose sin over God, we are saying, in this moment, I love this more than I love you. All right, I love this more than I love you. And that is not how we've been called to live. So in our new nature of delight and loving God, we are perfectly suited for this pursuit because we have become partakers of the divine nature. We have come alongside of him. We've partaken in him. Secondly, in verse 11, all of God's people will know him and not just know about him. Under this new covenant, all of God's people will know him personally, and this is universal, right? This is for everyone. We get to personally know the creator of the universe. We don't just have a head knowledge about him. We get to have a heart connection with God. We get to know him on a personal basis where he truly cares for us and we truly get to care for him. I've told you 1,000 times, there is a big difference in knowing about someone and knowing them truly. And God is giving us the opportunity to do a lot more than know fun facts about him. He's giving us the opportunity to walk through life with him, to experience him, to know him, and to be with him forever. Third, in verse 12, God will forgive sins and forget those sins once forgiven. And that is a beautiful thing for us. That God forgives us in such a way that it's like it never even happened. All right, it's not that he's put it to the back of his brain or that he'll bring it up on a later date like someone that tries to hold things over your head. Well, do you remember when you did this that one time? That's not how God operates. All right, God instead, he literally casts our sin as far as the east is from the west. It's like it's never even happened when we put our faith, hope, and trust in him. So when we get a new and fresh start with him, it truly is a new and fresh start. We are brand new. All right, we are made new in him. When we read into this covenant, it's not that the old covenant was canceled out. Right? It's not like God just put a big X on it. It's that he sent his son to fulfill it perfectly. So it is covenant complete. He completed that covenant on our behalf. And in fulfilling that covenant that we could not fulfill, he brought a new covenant for us to be able to walk in. And the only way that is possible is through the finished work of Jesus. It is blood for blood. And only perfection can take the place of imperfection. Man, it is a beautiful thing that with the reality of this covenant, we are now under grace, right? We are under grace. The grace of Jesus covers us. But are we even grateful for that grace? Do we walk that out? Do we live like this thing that Christ has accomplished for us is true? Because if I'm honest, I see not only a lot of people in student ministry in general, college ministry in general, but just life in general, that live for themselves and say that they live for him. Their mouth and their actions are two completely different things. He paid the price for you. All right, we were as hopeless could get, and he gave us hope. We weren't just as good as dead. We were literally dead. And just like Lazarus, he told us to get up and walk. He gave us new life and life to the fullest. So in being covered by grace, how do you treat that grace? Do you have a mindset of abusing the grace and getting as close to the world as you possibly can without falling over the edge? Or are you someone that is overwhelmed by God's grace and lives in a way that is thankful for the way that he has covered you so that you can then seek after him with your whole heart? If you consistently abuse God's grace, you do not understand what it really is. All right. If you consistently abuse God's grace, you have not fully understood God's grace. You need to learn to walk and live like someone of value, because at the end of the day, regardless of how much like trash you feel like you are, or how far away you are, or how cruddy your situation is, or how far you have wandered off and ran in the other direction, he gave everything for you. All right. So for those of you that have, whether it is body image issues, self-worth issues, or just issues with your mentality or emotions or anything that's going on with you. You are someone of value because Jesus says you're valuable. He illustrated it for you by coming and dying for you, for making a way. That means that each and every person that walks the face of this planet not only has purpose, but they have a Father that loves them even if they've never met Him. All right, that is the truth. And because of those things, we have nothing to fear. It's only 8:02. Don't get too antsy. I've still got at least 10 minutes to talk. So, what does having nothing to fear look like? Right? What does having nothing to fear look like? When we get into the book of Philippians, we come across a really popular scripture quote that is in Philippians 1:20 through 21, but in the tail half of it essentially just says, "For me, to live is Christ and to die is gain." And that is the outlook that God is calling us to have on our lives. That at the end of the day, you can kill me because you're doing me a favor. I get to go home. I get to be with my Father. He's made a place for me. He loves me. He made a way for me. So I don't have to fear death because when I die, I keep living, right? You can't kill me. My soul's not going to die. I get to go and be with Him. You can have this, all right? I don't need this. So what does that look like practically in life? Well, let's take a few examples from Tyler's personal storybook. When I was in LA, I've been there for about four months total. I got chased by a demon-possessed guy that was foaming at the mouth and was about 6'4", 265 pounds. Looked like an NFL middle linebacker. And he was possessed by demons, literally cursing God and shouting at me, foaming at the mouth. And we're standing here dude, this guy is about to literally rip me to shreds. And so he takes off sprinting directly at me. And he hits an invisible wall about 15 feet away from me, between me and him. And he literally bounces back and kind of looks, and then he starts yelling again, tries it again, boom, bounces back again. And for me, that was really my first illustration that light truly does overcome darkness, that God is protecting me, God is caring for me, God is literally preventing this man from getting to me. God had put a shield of protection around me. And so at that moment, I was like, dang, God, you're awesome. This is so cool. This guy cannot touch me, dude. This is I wasn't even scared. This dude was it was like I was in a fishbowl, and he was just bouncing off of it and couldn't get to me. So we had that experience, right? There was another time that I was in Los Angeles, and probably none of you know these people, but I had this guy named Brian Brockwell and Thomas Harrison. They were two of my students, and they were sophomores in high school at the time, and somehow we got separated from the group out in Skid Row, which, for those of you that don't know, Skid Row is the most homelessly populated area in the United States. In about a 3-mile radius, there are 3,000 homeless people. The police don't really show up unless they're there to pick up the bodies. There's a high level of heroin there. There's a high level of gang activity. There's a high level of heroin use, meth use, all different kinds of things like that. But we were out there, and we saw these two people to go pray with. One guy was in a wheelchair. The other one was just standing next to him. And I start talking to these guys, and I look over at Brian and Thomas. They're 15, and they're just staring over to the left at the ground like this. And I was like, dang, what are they looking at? And I look over, and there's a 3-foot puddle of blood next to these guys with a pair of panties in the middle of it because they just got done raping a woman directly next to them before I had gotten up there. And so I was like, shoot, I need to get these guys out of here. And right as that happens, one of the guys looks at Brian or Thomas and goes, what you looking at, little boy? And Thomas goes, I am not looking at anything, sir. Not looking at a single thing. I'm looking over here. And long story short, I got to pray with those guys and then skirt on out of there. But what do you have to fear in that situation? Right? There was another time in Skid Row, I saw an exorcism. That was pretty crazy, where a lady literally cast a demon out of a dude. Some of you guys are like, that crap's not real. It is, because I got another story for you. Last week, I was in a coffee shop in downtown Kingsport called Renewed Brew. I hang out there a lot. And I left, came back here, and about 30 minutes later, my friend Kara calls me. She's a female barista that works there. And she says, Tyler, hey, there's this man here that's making me feel really uncomfortable. Can you please come back to the coffee shop? And I said, absolutely, be there in 3 minutes. Don't worry about it. Hop in my car, drive over there, walk in, and it's her and this really sketched out looking guy in there alone. He's kind of peaceful at first, but as we sit down, he starts to get really violent and aggressive towards Kara, accuses her of psych punching her and doing all this other stuff. And in his world, in the world that he lives in, it's blood for blood. So if you
verbally assault him or punch him with your mind or do anything of that nature. It's the equivalent of you actually physically touching him. So to him, if you do that to him, he's going to kill you. So he told her that he's putting a death hex on her and that his people will come to kill her and all this stuff. And you're like, that sounds stupid. But this guy was affiliated in a gang and different things like that. He was also possessed by demons and strung out on heroin. You're asking, how can I tell that? Well, it's probably because he changed his voice about 15 different times during our hour-and-a-half conversation. And at one point rolled his eyes back into his skull and clicked at me for 35 seconds without stopping instead of using real like normal language. So he starts to get aggressive towards Kara. I'm like, dude, how about we just let her go to another room and me and you can have this conversation alone instead? And he's like, all right, that's fine. Yeah, send her to another room. So as soon as she leaves, he's like, you better be happy you did that, because with my people, when somebody acts like that and does things like that, we tie them up, throw them in the basement, and rape them. And I was like, shoot, this is getting pretty crazy. So start talking to this guy, continue on in our conversation, and I somehow find common ground with this dude where he doesn't want to murder me, and I talk as if we live in his parallel universe, and he respects me for it. End up getting him to go outside, and an hour and a half later, after talking to this dude, I get him to leave, and I'm like, cool, it's over, this is great. Well, then we do a little research and come to find out that this guy has previous assault charges stemming from the Appalachian Trail and different things like that. And then the very next day, come to find out that this man cut someone up on the Appalachian Trail, murdered them, and then attacked their friend. And she played dead, and that's the only reason why she got away with 8 machete stab wounds to the back after he had threatened to set their tent on fire and burn them to death. And that's the dude that I hung out with for an hour and a half. He's been all over national news, Fox News, CNN, everything. As this guy who is like the Appalachian Trail killer. His trail name is Sovereign and all this other stuff. But I'm not scared of that guy. And I'm not saying those things as stuff to toot my horn or brag about different things of Tyler's not afraid. You don't have a reason to be afraid in these situations. Yes, be smart. Make intelligent decisions. As kids, if you get in a situation that is stupid, get out. Run away. Call the cops. Whatever. But whenever we are dealing with darkness from the enemy, light always wins. Every single time. So why do you have nothing to fear? It's because everything that we've talked about from beginning to chapter 8 in this book, from chapter 1 to chapter 8, and everything else in between and after, everything in God's word is 100% true. He's exactly who he says he is. So because of those things, I can live out scripture that tells me to live as Christ, to die as gain. I don't have anything to be afraid of because of who fights for me, who has gone before me, and who has made a way for me. So that's all we've got for tonight.